Welcome to the Sri Lankan Understanding, a platform on which we explore the past, present and potential for the future of Sri Lanka, an island in the Indian Ocean which has experienced much over several centuries. Our topic for discussion today is foreign exchange revenue and looking at the scope for Sri Lanka. We have invited an international trade professional who has an MBA in marketing from the Cardiff Metropolitan University. He's a member of numerous international and local organizations connected to trade and business, as well as the International Chamber of Commerce. Nishan K. Silva. Thank you very much, Nishan, for joining us today. Nishan, when we look at Sri Lanka, when we look at the past, when we look at foreign exchange revenue, can you give us an overview of it? Where have we started? What have we been doing up to now?
George, if we look at the history of Sri Lanka since independence, at the time of independence, we had good, economically, highly quite a strong economy with what the British left behind. And incidentally, we were considered one of the fast moving and fastest growing economies in Asia. So if you look from that point onwards, where has Sri Lanka missed the bus? So now, as Einstein says, if we can't explain something simply, we have not understood the problem well enough. I will account it to two issues, or simply one: Sri Lanka's inability to connect to the global value chain. That's about all. That is the main issue which has come to the state today. And for the 73 years since independence, since 1948, we were unable to connect to the global value chain. Now, if you look at the countries which have evolved since then, I benchmark two countries. One is Israel, which has the same history as a country since they were formed in 1948 to date, so the same history that we have. Second is Singapore, which came around much more later than that. What did they do right with much lesser natural resources? Where we went wrong.
But we were able to use our natural resources, for example, our tea, our rubber, our coconut in the past. Rubber was a main product for us as well. We were one of the largest natural rubber producing countries, and that brought us massive revenue. So isn't it fair to say that we've done something in the past? Maybe lapses have come in at later stages.
Yes, we did something in the past, but we stuck there. We did not evolve with the times. See, if you look and see, benchmarking these two countries, what are the natural resources that Israel has? Camel infested place. I listened to recently a presentation by their current Prime Minister, a camel infested place. Look at all the international indexes, they are in the top 20, including being the happiest country, one of the happiest top 15 countries, which is bombed daily. So in that context, with all these natural things, best location, best weather, tourist attractions, marine life, you name it, how come we end up here? Again, what you mentioned about tea, coconut and rubber, what did we do with those three commodities? Where are they today now? What was the value that we generated out of it? So there are, as much as, if you look at, there were so many different political visions that took place differently. But more than the politicians, there is a saying that in a democracy, the people get the government that they deserve. There's no point in blaming politicians when those same politicians are elected by the people. What I would say is, what were the professional communities doing? What was the whole idea about this free education system we have been so proudly talking about for the last 60 years? Where has it economically benefited us as a state? Today, the country's national security is at risk. So where has those intellectual capital being invested? So answering those questions if you see, and strategically thinking. You see, if you look at Sri Lanka, never had a strategy. Never had a strategy. So the idea is you cannot expect a politician to come out with strategies. They are playing to the whims and fancies of the public who elects them to power. So in such a scenario, what were all these professional bodies and all the chambers doing all these whiles? Advising the, without, getting more engaged in the socio-economic future of the state. Now this is what has been observed in countries like even Israel, even in the West, even in the developed communities. One example is the financial system in UK, why it has become the top financial centers. Those are all self-regulated systems. And those self-regulation is what has ultimately come into law. The disciplines that have been cultivated. So those things have been missing right throughout. So now we have come to a stage where the world has left us behind and moved on. So now we do not know how to connect to the global value chain. So coming out with coconut or tea or something is no longer competitive advantage as a country. When there are high tech, like new technologies which have come in, and where are more products and services which are more strategic interest to for globalization than a mere having a cup of tea or eating some pulsam ball.
And this is where probably we have not realized that need, as you said, that value addition. When we sell tea, we are still selling the tea
exactly.
leaves. Others are buying it and they are converting that into tea essence and tea oil.
Absolutely.
Using it
now
for so
one
many other
example,
purposes.
George, is that this just one. There may be n number of examples like this. There is a product called tea tree oil, which is used for cosmetics and which is used for pharmaceuticals. Do you know that this is grown in Australia and it's imported to Sri Lanka, whilst this is supposed to be the tea producing country? So where has all those competencies that are desired? Right now, if you look at the world over, I think Sri Lanka is the only country which has a national brand called Ceylon tea. Ceylon cinnamon, unique only to Sri Lanka. So what have we done with those geographical identities?
It's because we haven't used those that we've probably lost those identities.
Exactly.
So today
So
when
what
we
I say,
talk about that foreign exchange lack or lack of it or
absolutely.
problems, it's like natural.
Exactly the point.
It's surprising it happened only now.
Now,
it could have happened much earlier.
This is exactly what, now these are not popular thinking, sometimes a lot of people find it against me for telling me these things, because it's human nature to be saying that the problem is always out there, it's not with me, right? But if you see, now with all these natural resources, why have we become an import dependent country to this extent? Right? So, with all these opportunities, now why couldn't we connect to the global value chain? To connect to the global value chain, there are only two areas that are required: competency and connectivity. We have failed in both. Contrary to having free education for more than 60 to 70 years.
It's a very important point, Nishan, and I'm going to stop at that point. We'll come back to that. The whole idea of competency. What have we done with what we have? Where are we at the moment? That's what we want to take up on our second segment of the Sri Lankan Understanding, when we return to discussing foreign exchange revenue and looking at the scope for Sri Lanka. Welcome back to the Sri Lankan Understanding. We're in conversation with Nishan K. Silva, and we're talking about foreign exchange revenue and the scope for Sri Lanka. Nishan, you gave us a trajectory of the past and how things have evolved at certain periods of time. We've probably done things, probably we haven't done more things. Where are we right now? What is the present state of play with foreign exchange revenue?
Well, we have been right throughout dependent in the apparel industry. Probably since 1977, if you see with the liberalization of the economy, then we introduced this multi-fiber agreement, it's a quota system. and during that period, it was dependent on much of the exports went into garments, and apparently what I feel is this tea, coconut and rubber, which was there traditionally, became somehow a bit neglected. Then somewhere in 2000, the multi-fiber agreement, it was cancelled. So within that time frame, what happened was most of the garment factories couldn't compete in an open market, and a lot of them migrated to Bangladesh and Vietnam and places like that. So since 2000, exports have been on a declining trend. Right. And the other thing about the apparel industry is it's highly import dependent. It's only the labor component virtually which is retained in Sri Lanka. So basically, it's a case of money coming in and going out. So which in turn does not address the country's liabilities. So in 2018, there was much hype that the apparel industry had achieved a 5 billion revenue to the country. Now, if such is the case, if it was so meaningful from national interest, will we be in this situation? What we face today? So though it was turnover-wise, it was very attractive, but in terms of addressing the liabilities and serving the strategic interests of the country, it didn't make any sense. So we have come to a stage that we are dependent on a majority on Middle East labor, right? The blue collar, domestic labor, and rest of it is in tourists. Now, nowhere in the world has a country become a developed state from these two areas. So again, a question arises with all these natural resources that we do have. Strategic location in the world, which I don't think any other country has, intersecting the 3 or 4 key continents. With all those, why are we driven to be dependent on labor, on migrant labor, which is also domestics and basic laborers and not professionals, and a few tourists?
And that's where those who are going abroad are enduring very harsh conditions.
Exactly.
There are blood, sweat and tears in order for us to make some kind of progress.
This is what I am saying. It's not a popular thought to say, but even I feel ashamed as a professional, but I am dependent as a professional on the dollar incomes of housemaids. That's the glaring truth. How much we try to, make us feel good about ourselves, that is a glaring truth where we have come today. Now, today what has happened is by 2026, according to what I have read on articles at Advocata and few institutes which have been speaking about this, we have to settle 26 billion by 2026.
The future looks very bleak
exactly.
in that sense. But why have we not been able, Nishan, to expand our portfolio? Our basket of goods remains the same.
Comfort zone. Professionals were in the comfort zone. See, it doesn't make any, you don't have to work very hard when the Middle East labor is providing the dollars, right? You do something here which is, we think that it's up to the standards of international global standards, right? And you earn some money in rupees, exchange that to the dollars that are sent from the Middle East labor, and buy some whiskey and some imported stuff and consider ourselves as developed. That has been the culture. That has been the culture since 1977. If it was not so, I'm sure you would have been far ahead than what we were today. But
this is where that comfort zone, that complacency that comes in as a result of that, those are stumbling blocks that we need to really address, really need to look at overcoming. When we come back in the next segment, Nishan, I want to talk to you about what more can we do. We're looking at development. We want development, but it comes at a cost. How are we going to address some of those issues? When we return on the next segment of the Sri Lankan Understanding. Welcome back to the Sri Lankan Understanding. We're in conversation with Nishan K. Silva and we're talking about foreign exchange revenue and the scope for Sri Lanka. Nishan, tell us, what can we do to correct this situation? How can we open our basket or expand our basket or have more baskets at the end of the day so that we are not so dependent on very limited areas? You mentioned tourism. A pandemic comes in, zero tourists come into the country, zero revenue from that sector. You can see why we are so badly hit at that point. Thankfully, there are people still out there toiling, slaving away for us, and we are staying afloat, so to say. But what more can we do to expand this basket of goods?
George, now the institutions I am engaged in, companies rather, we have floated several establishments, partnered with overseas entities in order to get into the actively engage in the global value chain. That's what I told my team is that's our core focus, right? So get into the global value chain, looking at the bigger picture of the world economy, how we can fit in. We have identified several areas. One key sector is getting Sri Lanka's SME sector engaged. Because if you look at historically, only few companies every day we hear who are exporting. Whereas 90% of Sri Lanka's employment is in the small to medium enterprises. So we have committed, I have set up an institution or even two where we are connected with North America and also China. These are the biggest markets which has high purchasing power, right? We found that these two markets are more conducive to our vision rather than focusing on Europe. And what we are doing is simply getting the SME sector engaged so that the rural economy connects with the global value chain. Now, how do we achieve that? Is through these SME sector enterprises. So already we have made arrangements. We have strategic partnerships. In fact, we have our own companies which are set up in North America, as well as we have in discussions in the process of implementing same in China also. Whereas in the case of China, there is a massive trade balance which is in their favor, so we have a lot of scope for that. But of course, there are standards. Again, now the other aspect is there are standards which are required. Is of very high category, where we have to bridge a huge gap in order to achieve the standard certifications. So these are the areas which we are focusing on. Now making a turnaround, keep creating this opportunity for all the SME sector companies to engage in this arena. In fact, I committed to the ambassador, Dr. Palita Kohana, that by end of this year, that is when the next Shanghai Expo happens, I will have 1,000 products or brands ready to engage in the Chinese market.
That's what we need.
Yes.
That's what we need to target. We need to have, as you mentioned earlier also, this strategy. The whole process of strategizing is not something alien. This is a concept that can be done. We do it on a daily basis. You and I think of what we are going to do for the day. We plan our days, our weeks, our months. Surely for a country, it should be on a much larger scale. Nishan, when we look at development, we want development. We want the highways. We want better facilities. We want all of that. We're not going to wait for it to come for the next generation or thereafter. So we are committing a lot in the process to that. And there are various accusations that come about at that stage saying, okay, so then you're going to bust up all your foreign exchange. At that point, it's going to be a bigger disadvantage, a bigger burden for the country. How do we deal with those two aspects? You want the development, you also want to try to preserve what you already have in terms of your revenue. How do we make a match here?
The first question that comes to my mind, why do I want the development for? What do you mean by development? Is it only infrastructure growth? Or a more advanced society with high social values? Better processes, systems and procedures? A disciplined society? Goal-oriented society? Or simply having, roads and, some fancy stuff just to satisfy our insecurities and say, look, we are also part of the crowd. Now, if you look at, now since we deal with so many professionals with other countries, and if we benchmark an equivalent from Sri Lanka, we see a huge difference. Why is that in a country which is supposedly have given 60 years of free education? So these are the questions. Without those fixing those aspects, what is this development we are talking about by seeing highways and buying vehicles on debt and driving around? Now I asked her, now these are social behaviors. You see, when you look at economics, you can't isolate it as economics and society itself. These are socio-economics. These are integrated with each other. 2013, IMF had, when Sri Lankan government wanted to reduce the interest rates, I can refer this article to you, I'll have to locate it. IMF had said, don't reduce the interest rates, it won't make any difference. Why? Because society will only buy consumer durables and consider themselves as developed and going into more debt. Now that debt has accumulated and we do not have the competencies or the strategic capabilities in order to sell it. Similar to what has happened to Uganda today. Now there is a lot of hype about this airport being taken over. I mean, these things just didn't happen like that. And there is no point in blaming an outside country which has given a loan and wants us just to honor according to international
which we asked for.
Exactly. And we are supposed to be a founding member of the WTO. Sri Lanka is a founding member of the WTO in 1995. What have we done with those? And today cannot find foreign exchange for its basic necessities.
The situation is bleak, to say the least. I mean, bleak being a very simple word there in terms understand where we are right now, Nishan. And what we realize is what we have done in the past. As you said, we got stuck somewhere. We had a process, we had a path. We had, of course, the conflict intervening, but the conflict is now more than a decade into the past. What have we been able to achieve in the last decade alone? How have we taken off? Has the economy really ridden and achieved the full potential that we thought it had? For the economy to have that, we need people behind it who are going to make sure that that happens. That's where the professional community comes in. That's where leaders come in. That's where you and I come in. People come in. All of us come in. It's a responsibility for all of us to understand that if this country is going to make progress, everybody has to chip in. Irrespective of what we do, how we contribute, we have to contribute to that bigger picture. And that is where we are going to see measures of conservation, trying to cut your coat according to your cloth, understanding what you have. You talked about getting into debt. We love doing that. And this is the credit card culture, I guess, that has taught us that, where you will buy things that you don't have money to pay for. And this has become a trend. This is something that has gotten ingrained into society, which a lot must be done to try to remove that. But thank you very much, Nishan, for giving us of your time to join us on the Sri Lankan Understanding. And that's where we wrap up this session, where we focused on foreign exchange revenue. Where we are at the moment, what is the scope for Sri Lanka as we go forward? There is a lot that can be done. There is a lot that should be done. The question is, what are you and I doing about it? Join us again next time on the Sri Lankan Understanding, when we focus on various aspects of the past, look at the present, and look to the future.